The launch of Africa Month was born more out of a need than a desire. It was in April 2015 under the auspices of Arts and Culture Minister Nathi Mthethwa, who took the baton in the great and self-determining narrative that Africans must carve and tell their own stories. In 2016, this initiative is not only growing but fast becoming a beacon of light on the continent. While the first launch of Africa Month spoke of opening doors of learning from Cape to Cairo, it is in its second year that the reach and extent of the program has widened to involve more participation in the program. This year's theme is Building a Better Africa and a Better World, and launched aptly at the place of our undeniable humanity, the cradle of humankind.
Africa Month because it's a time when we all reflect on our collective identity as Africa. Whether you're Kenyan, Ethiopian, South African, it's a time just to reflect on a shared heritage as Africans. It is in our DNA, it is in our collective identity. We are all Africans, and there must be something connecting us, whether it is our history, whether it is our prehistory, and here it's very prominent that we are at the cradle of humankind.
Talking about our African culture, it's talking about our identity, our togetherness, our integration. We at the African Union develop policies in the area of culture. We have mainly the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance, which promotes our culture, our identity, and also the AU Agenda 2063, which is an instrument which has several aspirations for where we want Africa to be by 2063.
Before the targets of 2063, Africa Month 2016 aimed to touch on our common heritage, culture, and humanity. In the month of May, no African stone would be left unturned. From literature to academia, prayer to music, the concoction of color and array of African splendor would be laid bare, not only for Africans, but for the world to see.
Our gathering here today is also therefore to pay tribute to this human journey, the African journey, where we are witnesses to an ongoing quest across time and space for our most precious belonging, and that is our freedom. In the words of the poet Ben Okri, from his poem, Mental Fight, I quote, "You can't remake the world without remaking yourself. Each new era begins within." We could use the new era to clean our eyes, to see the world differently. Only free people can make a free world. Infect the world with your light. Help fulfill the golden prophecies. Press forward the human genius. Our future is greater than our past.
It is the future that this program seeks to touch. South Africa may be the third largest economy on the continent, but it is undeniable in its leadership. The country boasts the oldest African liberation movement in the African National Congress, and yet it was the last to attain its freedom. South Africa is admired the world over for its Truth and Reconciliation program, through which it was able to demonstrate a path to social cohesion in our diversity and cultural vibrancy. But it was perhaps South Africa's darkest hour first visited upon us in 2008, when the first flares of xenophobic violence occurred. The senseless and un-African act caught the country off guard. Africa had played host to numerous African National Congress leaders while in exile. These unfathomable actions were to rear their ugly heads again in 2015, and African nationals were left displaced by the thousands, and some even lost their lives. The rainbow nation of Nelson Mandela was beginning to unravel, and not only in itself, but also reversing some of the gains of post-democratic South Africa. This did not sit well with fellow Africans.
We were very angry. I grew up at the time of apartheid. I was a young boy in Kenya, and in the universities, people used to sing Sikelele Africa, all our plays were about freeing Mandela, about freeing South Africa, and we were so passionate about it. So in my lifetime, I saw Zimbabwe become independent, Namibia become independent. Finally, South Africa became independent. And we love everything South African in terms of black South Africa, the struggle. So we looked up to this day. But when there was xenophobia, we felt betrayed. Africans felt, what is happening? You know, we are part of that liberation of that country. That is our country. Whether I am Nigerian, I am Kenyan, I am Ugandan, and that's our home. That should never happen on the soil of Africa. But it's not all South Africans who did that. It is just a few people who will spoil for others. And I'm very happy that the government has turned that around. It should never happen on any part of this continent. An African must walk proudly on the African continent.
I've engaged with people, and people are saying they are going to retaliate. If they can't retaliate here, they will retaliate back home. People have been calling their people back home to say, look what we are facing here. You people must also do the same thing. But we are trying to tell people, let us not push that anger outside like that.
All the whole cars there in my shop burn away. Even the goose we put up there, they steal it. Then burn the goose, they take away everything there. Then burn everything. So we don't know what we're gonna do. We don't know where we're gonna start.
Right now we don't have anything. Secondly, just to survive, because government must be protect us.
What's your plan from now? What do you plan to do?
I don't have any plan. I don't know where I go.
The continent is clearly on a deliberate path, a drive to pursue an agenda which turns the story on its ugly head through the embrace of Africanism, multiculturalism, but Africa must first begin with itself.
We are moving the world towards the acceptance of a multilateralism and a multiculturalism, a cultural coalescence, and a cosmopolitanism. It is in this current climate, in pursuit of commonalities, that the current initiative on Africa Month is aimed at pursuing an agenda set out by our predecessors, but sharpened by the new generation. This agenda seeks to make Africa a better place to be and to live in.
Africans are welcoming. Africans are mindful of each other. They like to be together. But amongst us, of course, there are rotten potatoes, as someone has put it this morning. But what we need to do is to raise the awareness and then work in collaboration with everybody else. Like the Africa Month program, I see it as an opportunity to raise the profile of Africa, to promote our identity, and to get this renaissance that we always talk about.
What is being talked about now is the colonial geographies that would later come to define the continent. The story of the cradle of humankind tells of some of the earliest history of mankind. This is a story of birth and migration. It chronicles how some of the small footsteps took to the world without borders and restrictions. Long before we needed visas, a world where our ancestors lived as nomads and roamed freely towards sustenance. Some scholars would later come to define the actions and motives behind xenophobic actions as a fight for limited resources and increased competition. Africa is on a quest to rewrite its own stories, to open itself more to free movement and more inclusive continent, a celebration of its languages and culture that Africa gave to the world. The continent is on an irreversible path to redress a past characterized by instability, war, and migration. Since the turn of the 20th century, when the Pan-Africanist Congress was first held, to the 60s, which saw the formation of the Organization of African Unity, Africans were beginning to take charge of a new narrative.
This is why we can speak with confidence about African world heritage and the heritage that Africa bequeaths its people and the world. This is also why we assert the right of the peoples of permanent peace and sustained stability within their places of birth, free of the warmongering of others, for no one should be forced to move under duress. Our gathering here today is also therefore to pay tribute to this human journey, the African journey, where we are witnesses to an ongoing quest across time and space for our most precious belonging, and that is our freedom.
This freedom was to be the hallmark of an African struggle in the 21st century, a liberation beyond shackles and borders, but a liberation of the mind. Perhaps no one single moment brings us closer to feeling free than the seminal work of Pixley Kaisa Kaseme in 1906 on the regeneration of Africa, more commonly known today as the I Am African speech. This spurred on a common conversation among Africans on the continent and elsewhere in the world. Africans knew that we cannot be free until all of Africa was free.
As we continue to refine a struggle for Africa's freedom that spent a century confirming W.E.B. Du Bois' prophetic words that the problem of the 20th century was the problem of the color line. Whilst there have also been setbacks in countries and regions where divisions amongst ethnic lines have been further hardened by those who seek to gain economic advantage from the fanning the fires of difference and division, this only reinforces the need for an Africa that emphasizes commonalities, shared vision, and joint efforts. The transformation of the OAU into the AU and the renewed efforts to have programmatic relations between Africa and her diaspora have created a climate conducive to the reassertion of African identity and renewed a movement towards rebirth and economic regeneration.
After the break, we look back at some of the highlights of the second Africa Month celebration and colloquiums through the Department of Arts and Culture's month-long program by exploring African heritage, academia, social cohesion programs. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Africa Month Special right here on CNBC Africa on this Africa Day. On this leg of the journey, we explore the aim and aspirations of an Africa in 2063, a continent that will occupy its rightful place in the world. The month of May is also significant towards that quest. It marks the 10th anniversary of the Africa World Heritage Fund. Launched in May 2006, 10 years on, this fund has helped not only tell Africa's worth to the world, but also expose where heritage, artifacts, and people are in danger from those who do not yet understand the worth of telling the story of Africa's humanity. Vusi Tembandima is Acting Director General at the Department of Arts and Culture in South Africa and is also the chair of Africa World Heritage Fund. Vusi knows how important the last decade has been in increasing Africa's World Heritage nominations.
I think that we have done very well, given the fact that when this fund was set up, it was set up to ensure that we increase our nominations on the World Heritage List, but also it was established to ensure that we have those sites that are already in the World Heritage List are properly preserved. And I must say that since the inception of this fund, we already have inscribed something like 14 World Heritage sites or African World Heritage sites in the World Heritage List, which is a very big achievement. But also there has been capacity buildings where we have brought in experts to come and build capacity within various sites so that people who live around those sites and the managers who are managing these sites have got the technical know-how in terms of how those sites must manage for future generations.
The World Heritage List features over 1,000 places of historical reference and cultural importance. For all that Africa has given the world, it only boasts 89 World Heritage sites, and the fund has been a key driver in getting some of the continent's best heritage on the global map.
You need to have resources. you need to have expertise, because it's a very long process to have the site listed on the World Heritage List. First and foremost, you have to come up with a nomination, what they call nomination dossier, which then talks about the site, its outstanding universal value, how you're going to be managing the site going forward, how the site relates to the communities, local communities in terms of socio-economic development. So you need to package that, and packaging that kind of information, it requires people with expertise. It also requires you to then say, how are you going to ensure that those things that you have said it's of outstanding universal value, they're going to retain their integrity, so that the future generation, when they come, they will see why this site is being deemed of international significance.
South Africa features about 8 properties on the World Heritage Sites, from fossil hominid sites to Isimangaliso Wetland Park, to one of the greatest stories of a bygone African kingdom of Mapungubwe. This site was declared a World Heritage Site in 2003, but its significance was discovered much earlier than that. This site helped dispel the myths that Africans were told to believe about their forebears. As our helpful guide Cedric showed us the first excavation site, it is hard to ignore the remnants and signs of life gone by, how a people roamed and monarch served and protected a kingdom.
Talking about this here, if you look closely here, this line here, this layer, this goldish layer here, there's another one just above it, that one there. Also, if you look on the other side, you can see some on the other side. And those are hut floors. There's bits of black like that and that.
Oh.
Even there, pointed with that yellow line there, there's a black line there. That is all charcoal from fires.
Oh.
The site is at a confluence of 3 countries, Botswana, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. The area lays bare for all to see of how this area could have sustained life with its rivers and livestock with fertile farming and grazing land. The ceramics, however, convey a deeper story of commerce and trade with faraway lands. It is the climb up this famous hill of royalty that took my breath away. Heritage is not just a historical reference of time, but can be a big source of income to local community and the region as a whole.
Yes, I mean, once the site has been deemed to be of international significance, it draws more attention from tourists, from researchers, from various quarters. But I must say that as Africa, we do not compete amongst ourselves. We have always actually supported one another. You know, when you go to these World Heritage Committee meetings, we will always ensure that we push that more sites in the African continent go to the World Heritage List. We also push, in the World Heritage stage, that more support, more resources must be plowed into the sites in the continent, even for their conservation as well as their promotion.
Mapungubwe has been at the center of promotion for the Limpopo Tourism Agency since the site was declared a World Heritage Site.
A lot more can be done to expose what we have to the public out there. In fact, that's the reason why we are making that effort as we market Limpopo, to highlight sites like Mapungubwe, to say, starting with your students, that here is a national treasure available to you. We have facilities there for you to come and camp and sleep and experience kingdoms gone by, and experience history and archaeological findings, which will give you new knowledge, things that will complement what you are learning out there in class. Not just for entertainment purposes, but to enrich you, to realize that indeed this part of the world had a civilization that was thriving over the years, where your indigenous people were, during the Iron Age, trading with the Far East, with your India and your China. And you had an economy that was thriving at that time. But you also had social and political organization that was quite advanced for its time, so as to manage that economy that was existing at the time. So Mapungubwe is fascinating. It's fascinating. It's a place where we believe that tourists from far and near can learn a lot. But over and above that, as things happen now, you have people who are able to sell artifacts and to gain and profit from the current flow of tourists into Mapungubwe. So the economic impact of Mapungubwe on the economy of the province and of the country is quite significant, but we acknowledge that a lot can be done to take it to a higher level.
In 2006, Mapungubwe Cultural Landscape repatriated animal, which now roams freely on these lands. And according to Ndumiso, this was not so much an addition as it was adding to the natural offerings of the lands of the Mapungubwe during that time. Mapungubwe forms part of the Transfrontier Park, including Botswana, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. This makes it easy for animals to skip, hop, and run between the three countries. But standing in its full flourish and taking economic advantage is border control.
Over the years, the country has negotiated with Botswana and Zimbabwe to have a transfrontier conservation area so that animals can roam freely. And the location has been stocked with your animals, your big five, etc. But over and above that, it's a bedding paradise. You have a segment of the tourist market that is interested primarily in bedding, just going out there. I mean, I'm talking about people who will fly all the way from Europe to come and see the unique beds that we have on site. And over and above that, not only have we offered accommodation, but we think that the interpretation center that has been established there is one way of taking the site to another level, because that center on its own is a tourist attraction, let alone the hill where your kingdom used to be located. I think we need to be careful that we don't turn a site like that into something else that loses its essence, its scenic beauty, its rugged nature, because I think there are other sites that attract other tourists for other forms of, education and entertainment, which will offer that. But Mapungubwe is unique, and I think it must remain preserved as a unique area.
Conservation is not cheap. At times, it can be a point of contention, choosing between development and heritage. The role of the private sector has never been more nuanced in order to preserve the heritage and legacy.
I think that the private sector could do better, but I must say that African countries themselves, they have played a prominent role in ensuring that there is the sustainability of these funds, increasing the funding within the fund, the same funding that gets plowed into various programs. So I must say that the countries in the continent have played a prominent role, but also I must say also that a lot can still be done.
If we are going to sell African heritage to a global audience, then we will need to ask questions of ourselves.
Most importantly is for us to package Africa. What is Africa? What is African identity? Ask that question. And equally also it's very important to have this African month, because this becomes now a gathering point of where we reconstitute our identity. America was invented, so it is important for us as Africans to reinvent our identity so that it is palatable, so that it can be consumed by the younger generation as well. We should not be, identities are not static, identities are dynamic. We should also play into this dynamism of African identity and African history and make it more sexy, more important, more attractive to the young people. So I think use the media more, use film more, use music more. We must start telling our stories.
Something else that has proven dynamic is the constant change in threats facing heritage. The growing trend in funding terrorism is the sale of artifacts and items of cultural significance to the highest bidder, or simply just destroying it through war. None is more aware than Kenya and the threat posed by Al-Shabaab.
I think it's a shame that different conflicts are destroying different sites and monuments in Africa. There's a forgotten war in Africa, especially Somalia. Historic Mogadishu, if you read the Chinese chronicles, was one of the most advanced cities of that part of the world. Mogadishu now is in rubble, completely destroyed. And even recently, the Al-Shabaab destroyed some sacred graveyards belonging to another sect because there's a religious rethinking which is different from the traditional religious belief in Somalia. That's a forgotten war, a forgotten country, forgotten heritage, and we must focus on reconstruction of Somalia must also be part and parcel of the construction of that heritage. ISIS in Libya is a bomb waiting to just blow off. And Libya has some of the best World Heritage sites. That again is a big problem, and we know what ISIS has done in Syria and other parts of the world. They go for the heritage and they destroy it.
South Africa also faces its own domestic threat to heritage. Towards the end of last year, we saw a phase of protest accompanied by defacing of statues.
The destruction, the defacing of the heritage landscape in our country is not helpful at all. This catching up is emanate from the fact that you have more than 1,000 World Heritage sites, but you have only 89 in the continent, the entire continent, Africa. So it means that we still have a lot of work to do, because people must be able to come to Mother Africa and her diaspora, of course, and experience the heritage landscape. So for us, both from the point of view of putting ourselves firmly on the agenda, on the global agenda, but also for economic and social, also cultural integration, it is impacting negatively to us.
There are other ways of taking advantage of our natural or inherited offerings. Dr. Susan Kitumeze is a research fellow at the University of Botswana's Okavango Research Institute, and she is quite keen to take advantage of the SADC mining heritage.
This is another new way that Botswana is looking into, and that's part of also my research, that we can use this heritage knowledge for tourism rather than just for hospitals and maybe education payments. The beneficiation part of building tourism museums that are specifically diamond based. I mean, why would you come to Botswana and not have a museum route of the country, not only for diamonds, but there are other, like if you take, we have the copper mines that has been sustaining people for a very, very long time. But also in Southern Africa, mining and tourism is a big thing, because we have Iron Age sites that are all over in Southern Africa. Polokwane, if you go to Limpopo, you go to Daudzumakhala in Botswana, you go to Great Zimbabwe. Mining has always been a Southern African heritage that we should be selling to the world as a tourism beneficiation rather than just digging the ground. So that's it. I'm very glad that even media recognizes that, but sadly for Botswana, we are yet to get there.
Africa has a lot more to offer the world, not only in heritage, but also human capital and value. When we return, welcome back to Africa Month Special. Established in 1916 in the Eastern Cape, this university became a key institution of higher education for Black Africans. Fort Hare alumni were part of many independent liberation movements and leaders of newly formed governments around the continent. Several Pan-Africanists have footprints here, the likes of Oliver Tambo, Robert Sobukwe, the Arch Desmond Tutu, Kenneth Kaunda, Julius Nyerere, and more. President Zuma set the stage and gave context to the occasion.
This university is one of the most important heritage institutions in South Africa and the African continent. This occasion is thus important not only for our country, but for our continent as a whole. It was clear from the beginning that Fort Hare was going to be an extraordinary site of struggle, both for the education and liberation of the African. The history of Fort Hare would also be incomplete without emphasizing the role played by Professor Z.K. Matthews. A remarkable intellectual, political activist, and one of the prominent leaders of the ANC who strongly believed in education as an agent of change. Z.K. Matthews modeled the all-roundedness and excellence that is still rare to find. We are filled with pride when we mention the formidable intellectuals and leaders produced by this university. Professor Z.K. Matthews, Govan Mbeki, Phyllis Ntantala, Godfrey Bije, ANC President Oliver Tambo, President Robert Sobukwe, then ANC youth leader, and later PAC President, Prime Minister Nsumu Khetle, President Seretse Khama, President Nelson Mandela, T.T. Letlaka, as well as later generations such as Chris Hani, Dr. Zola Skweyiya, and many others. In fact, this institution produced 5 heads of state and government, a rare achievement in the history of humankind.
President Zuma was flanked by the last living African head of state to graduate from this university, Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe, a bachelor's in arts degree student in the 50s who went on to a further 6 degrees at various institutions. However, it was at Fort Hare where Robert Mugabe was politically conscientized.
At that time, not all of us were well schooled on the political situation across our continent. However, it was during this period that most of us became aware of the colonial yoke across our continent. It was through the education and mentoring at the University College that we started looking at the political situation in our various countries from an informed but critical perspective.
President Mugabe enjoys the love and respect of fellow alumni of the university.
We had Herbert Chitepo, he's late, George Tassisius Silundika is late, Samuel Parenyatwa, late, and Robert Mugabe, who is still alive.
President Mugabe attended the university at the height of apartheid rule in South Africa, and the grip of that rule was encompassing the greater Southern African region.
Fort Hare was regarded as an inferior institution. At the Wits, there was talk that Africans are not capable of doing certain degrees. They cannot do law. We had certainly Z.K. Matthews as a lawyer, but generally they said the Africans cannot do those things that are of an abstract nature. We are people who are used to look after cattle, goats, and sheep. We think in concrete terms, not in abstract terms. Now, law demands that you think in abstract terms. You must know what a crime is and what it is that makes a crime a crime. And they say, of course, in Latin, and we were being taught by Z.K. Matthews here, there must be the mens rea, the intent. There must be the action to go with the intent for the crime, for an action to be a crime. So the mens rea, the actus reus, that is action, together. And Africans cannot conceive that. So Joe Matthews had done a degree in arts, BA, I think it was English and history. Tumanoke in science. They say we must go to the Wits to do law and blow, I quote, blow that myth. And they went to the University of the Wits and blew that myth.
Robert Mugabe would later become the leader of a free Zimbabwe, and though some have criticized him for clinging on to the seat of power, President Mugabe is a great believer in education for all.
It can also act as my own tribute to my alma mater, the University of Fort Hare, if I establish a scholarship that would see some Zimbabwean students also go there.
By his own admission, it is cheaper to send students to one of the 14 universities in Zimbabwe, but the love and sentiment the president still has for this institution is unwavering, and a small number of Zimbabwean students continue to enroll at this great institution through the Presidential Scholarship Program of Zimbabwe. He does, however, concede they come back a little different.
By the way, we have not always come to South Africa and gone back empty-handed. So, whereas we have come as singles, we went back as doubles. Comrades and friends, in conclusion, let me once again congratulate the University of Fort Hare on this occasion of celebrating 100 years of outstanding achievements for South Africa, for the region, and for the African continent. I'm convinced that you will no doubt continue to serve Africa in the manner that you have done so effectively over the last 100 years. So, long live Fort Hare. Halala Fort Hare. Amandla. Amandla. I thank you.
Fort Hare has shaped the hearts and minds and filtered through the trenches of our leadership today.
In the Southern African sub-region, we produced at least 5 people who became not only respected academics or respected leaders, but leaders of countries. They became presidents of their various countries. So this centenary means a lot to us. It takes us back. It makes our young people realize the journey that we have traveled as African people.
It's exciting for some of us who knew Fort Hare when we were small boys in Bloemfontein, going to secondary school and passing daily and traveling through Fort Hare Road. And off Fort Hare Road comes Hubusana, Street Road, Mahabane, Jabavu, as a tribute and testimony to the value that was placed on education, higher education, by the leaders of the founders of the African National Congress, which it has bequeathed our society.
Fort Hare is a brand that you cannot replace with anything around the world. And when we're here, we used to say there are actually 2 universities in Africa.
Yes.
University of Fort Hare and University of Makerere.
It's a history of African people, it's a history of African liberation, it's a history of the African leadership. Over the period of time, during the time of repression, it produces some of the best finest minds in the African continent. That's why today, some of the great luminaries, like President Mugabe, are here with us to celebrate, because Fort Hare was a Fort Hare. It became a Fort Hare for great leaders.
The rise of the Fees Must Fall movement has brought student issues to the table of government. What started at the University of Witwatersrand was to become a movement that engulfed the entire country, and Fort Hare was no exception. While issues vary from campus to campus, access and affordability are at the core.
Even though we protest, and indeed we fought for the right for people to express themselves robustly if need be, but let us not destroy that which we have, the hard-won facilities and assets that we have, because they don't belong just to the students of this institution, they belong to all of South Africa.
There is a challenge when it comes to the funding in schools, and because our children don't come from the same families, and this is what we have to look into.
Whatever problems and challenges we're facing here today, it is a meaningful occasion that Fort Hare still exists, continues to educate and to produce, hopefully, pathfinders.
We're saying as former students of this university, when you're fighting for the well-being of a student, like meals and other things, you then don't ban a library, because when you get food, you will still need to go back and study in the same library.
Students must reflect and think deeply about whose interests they are serving when they go all out to destroy their future and the future of their country. Banning schools, libraries, and university buildings means banning the future in simple terms.
These events, however, could not cloud the gravity of the moment as we looked ahead to the next 100 years of Fort Hare.
Fort Hare, it must produce more of ZK Matthews. It must produce more of Owar Tambo. It must produce more of Robert Mugabe. Some of the great brightest minds which will take South Africa to the next century, they must come from this university. And they must use education to liberate South Africa and the continent.
I expect that the products of this institution will continue to populate those Africans that will implement our agreed Vision 2063 of the African continent, whereby when this generation of leaders that are presently leading have gone and retired and rested, that younger generation, wave upon wave, as they come out of the Fort Hares, the Makereres, the other institutions on the continent, that they will take over the leadership and the implementation of the many visions that African people have been producing.
I'm going to talk about women. I want to see young women going through different spheres of development. I want to see women as ministers, as managers, as DGs, HODs, presidents, and being brave, being able to say what they want to say, and being able to ensure that there is development in our country. And I do believe that women can make a big difference when it comes to gender equality.
We really hope that we can make a difference in our dialogue, in our discussion, to continue to see in the middle of rural Eastern Cape a university such as this one.
May Fort Hare live long, continue to shine for us as Africans in Africa. I thank you very much indeed.
After the break, we look at this year's Africa Month program from Cape Town to Durban. We span the country and bring you the celebration of Africa. Welcome back to the 2016 Africa Month celebrations. Around the country, colloquia were held, and the National Library Centre for the Book in Cape Town was one of them. This was to begin a series of dialogues aimed at promoting African identity and social cohesion.
They gathered here in Cape Town to discuss issues around race relations. Academics, artists, and members of the public got the chance to engage with government about the importance of embracing African identity.
We are dealing with a systemic problem. It's not just prejudice. It's much deeper than that. And South Africans, from all walks of life, we are challenged to reflect on ourselves and be honest about ourselves, whether or not each and every one of us are in a position to take a stand against racism. We should be able to accept that there is a problem among some of us, and how do we deal with that. If we circumvent the process and don't go straight to the heart of the problem, we'll be peppering the cracks. And it would be naive also to expect even the best drafted laws to eradicate decades of and centuries of oppression and institutionalized discrimination.
Hosted by the Department of Arts and Culture, under the theme Confronting Race and Racism, the colloquium was aimed at conversing around ways of overcoming a racist past.
Racism matters most when it affects, people's access to resources. If you are going to exclude me from resources, then racism bites very, very sharp. I think if you look at the Constitution, that's why our Constitution is weak, because it says those rights that facilitate access to resources, those rights are conditional.
Race is when people classify, and it came out of learned professors, centuries and centuries, I think 14th or 16th century, who came up with this classification of human beings in racial categories, and then attributed certain characteristics, to those races. And this has been proven to be false. But the perception persists that color of skin, race, determines the future of a person or the capabilities or the lack thereof. And this is not true. And that's where you get these negative attitudes, including racism, is when you forget that we all share a common, ancestry.
The night was also aimed at paying homage to the work of veteran African authors and highlight the importance of promoting black conscious literature, particularly at public schools.
I've been sort of fighting for a longest while now, like our youth, even people of 30 who have never read Cry Rage. What do they know about the role of the dissident poet This is what the school should be doing. Not only myself, our work should be on the curriculum of every high school. And a book like Cry Rage should even be used at a university for political science.
This month-long celebration was to include Africa Fashion Experience in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, and Trust Masilela was there.
It takes dedication, it takes obviously experience, it takes obviously making sure that you have a vision and a goal that will actually translate into what you want to see happening in the next 3 years or 4 years, you know. This initiative, it is the DAC Africa Month celebration. You know, the whole Africa Month, we felt it suited to actually celebrate it through fashion. You know, we felt that, you know, you have to kind of represent all the different countries within the region, which is the north, the east, and the west, and the south. We actually invited designers coming from different countries within the continent who are showcasing their work, which is the exhibition. And yesterday we had a business talk whereby we invited our moderator Theo Omambala, who's originally from Nigeria, but she is based in London, so that it's actually almost like a gateway for some of us who want to see our products going globally, so we actually forge those relationships.
It's a very tricky business to be in, but look, at the end of the day, as any business person, you have to find a way of positioning your brand in a very significant way so that your brand footprint is visible. So the fact that I get invited to come and showcase outside the country, that means our brand, it is significantly positioned, perhaps.
Could you briefly share with us your journey in the fashion business?
My journey in the fashion business, I started showcasing in 2010 at SA Fashion Week, and we've showcased in Nigeria, Tanzania. Actually, last year we were voted African Design of the Year in Tanzania, and also in a whole lot of African countries. And we have a flagship store now, and we're launching our online store very soon, so I think maybe we are well received.
I find that for me, we've just, especially when it comes to fashion and trends, as Africans, we've just come full circle where the rest of the world used to copy our authenticity. And it's very sad that now, after the Western world had copied that, now we're realizing our own roots. And such events are like igniting that essence that we'd lost. And we need to start tapping more into authenticity and tapping more into different cultures within the continent to celebrate them into much more directional and narrate our stories through cloth.
What exactly are we losing as Africans that is compromising our authenticity?
We're losing who we are. We've always been attracted. Immediately the whole world became MTV-fied. I always say we lost the essence of who we are. We lost the essence of purity, and we lost essence of what makes us African.